Don't fall into a scarcity mindset. Don't therefore require regulation that makes people unproductive. Instead, let's build a society of trust. And when we trust people, we fall in love with people.
Would you share with us an idea from the book, something from the Tree of Life and Prosperity that kind of, if you had, maybe it's somewhere between an elevator pitch and a few minutes with somebody, and they said, well, I want to know an idea from the book, something that you find meaningful and important. What's that idea that you'd want to share with that individual?
I'm tempted in this moment that's right after the withdrawal from Afghanistan to make a comparison, but I'm going to avoid it and go back to something we talked about earlier. But, a little bit, you can't escape this notion of Abraham confronting God and saying, are you doing justice to destroy this place? But I'll talk about the scarcity mindset because I think it's important. And the meeting between Jacob and Rachel on the well. We don't pay attention to this story. Those of us who grew up with a kind of Orthodox background believe this is like supernatural. He kind of comes there. Jacob comes to his grandfather's homeland in Haran, and he comes to a well, and there's a giant rock on the well. And the Bible, the Torah describes that around the well are all the shepherds waiting to water their flock. And then Rachel, his first cousin, comes and brings her flock of sheep, and she's waiting too. And Jacob walks over to the well and takes this giant rock off the well, or it's just a rock. We don't know. It's a rock. That's what the Bible tells us. But we grew up thinking this is a giant rock and it's supernatural. And I don't think it is. I'm not the only one who thinks this, by the way. Rabbi Abraham, the son of Maimonides, the Rambam, a similar view. There's a rock there, but they're waiting. Why are they waiting? They're waiting because the Torah has just told us that there was a famine. There was a famine in the time of Isaac, and the famine probably impacted there. And we can prove this from the verses as to that there was a famine that also extended to where Rachel is. And in famine and in scarcity, people lose trust, and there's a scarce natural resource. And in this case, the scarce natural resource is water. And the rock is there, it's regulation. It's a regulatory buffer, break against one shepherd feeding his flock at the expense of the other. This rock is preventing a tragedy, the commons, where one person optimizes for his own personal gain, feed his flock, and everybody will lose the available water. And what this tells you is in that Haran, where Rachel grew up, there was no trust. And in a place of no trust, they put a giant regulatory rock on the well. But when Jacob turns up, and he grew up in a house filled with trust, he grew up in a house that had plenty. Isaac found 100 gates of wheat. They had plenty of food. There was a lot of trust. And when he turns up, he doesn't say, what are you waiting for? You pay a giant price in productivity from this rock. You're all waiting around all day to take the rock off because you got to get everyone there so that no one cheats. And he walks up and nonchalantly, because we should trust each other, moves the rock. And Rachel falls in love with him, and he falls in love with Rachel. Now, I think when you kind of look at this story, you see Rachel, who grew up in a house in an environment filled with mistrust and distrust. And for the first time in her life, she meets somebody who was willing to take action, not wait around, who is productive, and more than anything, embodies trust and says, I want to marry that. And he says, I want to marry her. And that's a super important thing. And Jacob is cheated for the next 20 years of his life in the house of his father-in-law, but doesn't lose this kind of homegrown value of trust. And I think that is the linchpin of society. That is the linchpin of a biblical truth that we need to get back to. Don't fall into a scarcity mindset. Don't therefore require regulation that makes people unproductive. Instead, let's build a society of trust. And when we trust people, we fall in love with people. When we trust people, we feel capable to take action. Right now, we don't have to wait because there's a lot of trust. And I think that's an important lesson in this post-COVID, somewhat feeling of scarcity environment right now.
I mean, that is such a gorgeous take. I want to, that what came up right at the end over there was, I wonder if you've thought about what is the rock of our time?
That's a really, really, really great question. I'll give you the obvious answer and then the less obvious answer. The obvious answer is the rock of our time is increasing regulation at a government level. Because they're increasing gaps in society, and what the government does when they see gaps in society is they come in and regulate. I think that's the obvious answer. I think the less obvious answer is it's a cover on our hearts. We are in a place right now where, whether it's because of social media and the screaming there, whether it's because of vaccines or politics, we've ceased to trust people. And it's really difficult when you have all this information coming at you and when everyone's screaming and the politics are so divisive, to actually see the human being across the way and trust them. I have a dear friend. I hope you won't kill me. His name is Lyle. He and I agree about nothing politically. Nothing. I love the guy. I talk to him. We talk in calm tones. He trusts me and I trust him. And it's a special relationship born of a face-to-face meeting. It's not the only one. And I think the giant regulatory barrier right now is noise and politics that causes us not to find trust. And there are real issues. It's not like people who don't get vaccinated aren't causing a big tax on society. They are. And that creates scarcity mindset because we can't open up. And it isn't that big tech isn't an issue. It does. But screaming about it doesn't help. What helps is to build trust and then go work together that builds trust, see a human being, and then we go do something about it together.
That's really the whole game, isn't it? Is that life is really about relationships, and life is about being able to have a two-way relationship with every human being that you come in contact with without having as many barriers as there are when we start. And the closer we get to that connection and that unification, everything else is a byproduct of the life relationship that you have with them, which, going back to your earlier point, is why it is more difficult to foster that trust through a Zoom call or through a phone call than it is from being able to sit down with another person, have a drink together, and discuss life and get to know them, face to face. If there's maybe one last thought, message, insight that you'd like to leave, me with, I'd love to learn from you and the audience with, as we go into the kind of this like last bit of the summer and into a new year. I know Rosh Hashanah is upon us. It's just in a few weeks. What's a thought that's carrying you and inspiring you as you think about life moving forward?
With your permission, I'll say two. One, but they're related. My children always get annoyed at me when I say this. I speak to high school kids a fair amount, in their senior year. And at the end, I always get asked this question: what's kind of the last piece of advice? And I always tell them the same thing, which is get married young and have children. And the reason I say that is I think life is better shared. And I think we become better versions of ourselves when we share life with a spouse who critiques us, who we have to learn to live with, and who also supports us at the same time. And when you have children, one, you learn to love unconditionally. And two, you learn that every human being is different because your own kids are different. We think it's like the same genetic makeup. How do they all get to be so different? How does that happen every time? And I think that's really important to kind of become a whole person, both for everyday life and for business. It enables us to kind of connect. And I think the transition into Rosh Hashanah and the New Year is there's a passage that I'm always struck by in the liturgy, which is after blowing the shofar, the ram's horn. We say a short little passage that says, today is the day the world was created, or impregnated is the direct translation. And everybody is judged on this day. And then it says, perhaps like slaves and perhaps like children. And I've always been struck by this notion that it's the day the world was created, or was impregnated. And the reason impregnated, by the way, is according to Jewish tradition, or at least according to one person's view of Jewish tradition, this is the day that Adam was created. And so humanity comes into existence according to this tradition on that day. And that's clearly, this liturgy is following that tradition. And we ask, are we slaves or are we children? And I'm asking myself, the passage goes on to say that if we're children, have mercy on us. And if we're slaves, just take care of us. But I think the broader question is, what's the role of the child and what's the role of the slave? And what we're really saying there is, we're a person who was born on this day if we're like a child, just like Adam was born on this day. And I think Rosh Hashanah, the New Year, is a time to reset relationships, to kind of demand that I want to be a child and not a slave. And we're enslaved to lots of things, whether it's, social media, whether it's to the bon ton of the day, the zeitgeist. I feel like I got to conform. Whether it's fixing up my picture for Instagram, and whether it's, hey, you just got to do this now. So, but being a child actually gives you more degrees of freedom, ironically, than being a slave, and, be more different. And I think that's important as we enter the new year, is we should be more like children. We should be in awe, like children are, of the new things we discover. We should think that the future is better and ahead of us. We can be more optimistic that way. And that makes the future better when we're more optimistic. And I think, lastly, it calls us to give and demand love unconditionally from other people.
Well, Michael, thank you so much for that. And really for all your time here. This has been absolutely a pleasure. And maybe just we can direct people, for those who are interested in getting the Tree of Life and Prosperity, best place for people to find it now is?
Amazon. But you can also find it on barnesandnoble.com and Book Depository if you want free international shipping. And BookPal is doing 50% discounts, I think it is, for orders of 25 books and more, if you want to give it out as a Rosh Hashanah present. So
amazing.
Thank you.
Amazing. Okay, everybody go out and get the book. It's a good one. I'm telling you, I've read it myself. And Michael, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Rabbi Gersht.